The feed goes quiet at 14:23 mission time. Mission Control sees it 20 minutes after it happens. The rest of the world sees it live, which means the rest of the world knows before Mission Control does. The crew member is gone. The habitat sensors are still transmitting. The data is clean and unambiguous, and the 20-minute delay means that by the time Mission Control confirms what the data shows, the story has already been written by every news organization on Earth, every social media platform, and every government with a camera pointed at the situation. The mission is not over. The program is. Every crewed spaceflight program in history survived its first failure, and not one of them survived its second the same way. That sentence is not a prediction about engineering. It is a description of a political pattern that has repeated without exception across 60 years of human spaceflight. The pattern does not depend on whether the accident was preventable. It does not depend on whether the engineering that follows is better. It depends on whether the public, watching their government spend billions of dollars to send human beings somewhere dangerous, decides they have seen enough. And that decision, in a democracy, in a social media era with a 20-minute signal delay and no ability to intervene, is made faster and more finally than any mission architecture planning document has ever accounted for. January 27, 1967, Launch Complex 34, Cape Kennedy. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are sealed inside the Apollo 1 command module for a routine pre-launch test. A fire starts in the capsule. The exact ignition source was never definitively determined. In the pure oxygen atmosphere NASA was using at the time, the fire propagates faster than the crew can respond. All three are dead within 17 seconds of the first distress call. The program is suspended for 20 months. Apollo survived. It survived because 1967 was not 2003, and 2003 was not now. The Cold War was not a background condition in 1967. It was the program. The Soviet Union had put the first satellite in orbit, the first human in space, and the first spacecraft on the moon. The political cost of pausing the American space program was measured against the political cost of losing the race entirely. And losing the race was considered an existential national security failure. The public grief over Apollo 1 was real. The political pressure to continue was stronger. The program resumed because the geopolitical context overrode the loss. That context does not exist in any form recognizable to a Mars program operating in the 2030s or 2040s. There is no Cold War equivalent to override the reaction to a crew member dying on camera 20 light minutes away in a habitat that cannot be reached in under 7 months. January 28, 1986. Challenger lifts off in below freezing temperatures at Kennedy Space Center. 73 seconds into the flight, a seal failure in the right solid rocket booster allows hot gas to escape, compromising the external fuel tank. The vehicle breaks apart at 48,000 feet. All 7 crew members are lost. The shuttle program was suspended for 32 months. The program resumed. Shuttle flew again. But the political environment it flew in was measurably different after the return to flight. Manifest schedules built on an assumption of routine, reliable access to orbit were revised permanently. The payload that Challenger carried, a commercial satellite and a school teacher selected through a nationally publicized competition to make spaceflight relatable to ordinary people, represented a program that had positioned itself as safe and democratically accessible. After Challenger, the program no longer made that claim, and the public no longer believed it. February 1, 2003. Columbia re-enters the atmosphere with a breach in the thermal protection system caused by foam impact during launch 16 days earlier. The vehicle breaks apart over Texas and Louisiana. All 7 crew members are lost. The program is suspended for 29 months. The suspension after Columbia was 2 months shorter than the suspension after Challenger, but the political consequence was larger and more permanent. The investigation board's report was more pointed in its institutional criticism. The decision that followed to retire the shuttle program by 2010, eventually executed on schedule, was a direct consequence of the political environment Columbia created. The 32 months after Challenger produced a program that kept flying for another 17 years. The 29 months after Columbia produced a program already scheduled for termination. The trend line across those three events is not ambiguous. Apollo 1, suspended, resumed with Cold War urgency intact. Challenger, suspended, resumed with reduced confidence and permanent schedule revision. Columbia, suspended, never returned to its previous form, eventually canceled. Each event extracted more from the program than the one before. Each event found less political resilience available to spend on the next return to flight. A Mars mission adds 3 variables to this pattern that have no precedent in the shuttle era. The first is the signal delay. Challenger took 73 seconds to end. Columbia took 16 minutes from the first signs of abnormal heating to communication loss. Mission control was present for both events in real time. Investigation teams had physical wreckage to examine. The crew's final communications existed in full. None of that is available at Mars distance. A crew death on Mars arrives on Earth as a 20-minute-old data record, already finished with no intervention possible at any stage and no physical evidence recoverable on any timeline relevant to a political response. The investigation that followed Challenger and Columbia, methodical, evidence-based, years-long, has no equivalent for a Mars casualty. The board convenes, the cameras turn on, and the first finding is that the primary evidence is on a planet that cannot be reached for 7 months and will not be revisited for years after that. The second variable is the political response timeline. After Challenger, the investigation board report was released 14 months into the suspension. The decision to return to flight came at 32 months. Those timescales were set by the physical investigation, institutional review, and congressional hearing schedules. A Mars program death investigation has no physical evidence to pace the timeline. The political response will not wait for evidence that cannot be collected. The hearings will happen on a schedule set by the election cycle, not the evidence cycle. And the next Mars launch window, the orbital alignment that makes a Mars mission feasible, occurs approximately every 26 months. A Mars program suspended in response to a crew death will miss at least 1 launch window, possibly 2, while the political process runs at its own pace. Missing 2 consecutive Mars launch windows is not a pause. It is the end of crew continuity, the dispersal of the technical team, and the beginning of the institutional forgetting that requires a rebuild rather than a resumption. The third variable is the scale of exposure. The media environment of 1986 and 2003 is not the media environment a Mars mission operates in. Challenger was watched live by an unusually large television audience because a school teacher was on board and classrooms across the country had been tuned in for the launch. Within hours, the footage had been replayed across every television network. Within days, the public response was fully formed. The timeline from event to political consequence was measured in days and weeks. A crew death on Mars does not move on that timeline. It moves in minutes. The crew will have social media presences established before departure. The mission will have streaming channels and regular content output, designed specifically to maintain the public engagement that keeps the program funded across a decade-long development timeline. The audience watching a Mars crew member die will be an audience that has followed that person for years. The reaction will not need days to form. It will be fully expressed within hours, and the political pressure it generates will reach legislators the same day. The 32 months NASA had to conduct its Challenger investigation before returning to flight was a window created partly by the slower pace of institutional processes in 1986. That window does not exist for a Mars program. The political response arrives before the investigation can begin, in an environment where the investigation cannot collect its primary evidence for years. The engineering response to the political risk of crew death is the same response that engineering always offers. Reduce the probability, build more redundancy into every critical system, add more abort options, extend the pre-mission testing timeline. These are the correct responses to the engineering problem. They are not responses to the political problem. The shuttle program after Challenger was safer than the shuttle program before Challenger. The independent safety oversight was stronger. The launch commit criteria were stricter. The foam impact issue that caused Columbia had been observed on previous flights and accepted as within tolerance, the kind of known anomaly that a post-Challenger safety culture was specifically designed from preventing becoming a mission-ending event. The engineering improvements were real. They did not prevent Columbia, and the safer program that existed after Columbia still ended. Making a Mars mission safer to the point where crew death becomes statistically improbable requires adding every safety system the engineering analysis identifies as reducing mission risk. Each addition adds mass. Each addition of mass adds propellant. Each addition of propellant multiplies mission cost. A Mars mission built to the safety standard that might satisfy a post-casualty political investigation would cost enough that the political support required to fund it would likely collapse before a crew ever launched. The safety investment that addresses the political risk of crew death competes directly with the budget tolerance of the democratic institutions funding the mission. There is no architecture that resolves that trade-off. The mission designers know this. It does not appear prominently in mission planning documents, because there is no section in a mission planning document for political cancellation following crew death. The pattern is not a prediction about human irrationality. It is a description of how democratic funding works. Public support is the resource that makes a Mars program possible. Public support is generated by visibility. Crew profiles, mission cameras, transparent operations, the human story that turns a science program into something people vote to continue funding. The same visibility that generates the support generates the exposure. A program that cannot be seen cannot be funded. A program that can be seen cannot survive being watched when it fails. Columbia's final crew, Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, Laurel Clark, Ilan Ramon, were not abstractions when they died. They had been introduced to the public. Their mission had been covered. Their return was being anticipated. The political response to their loss was not an institutional malfunction. It was a democratic system responding as it is designed to respond, to a visible human cost paid by people it had been asked to care about. A Mars mission will amplify every one of those conditions. The crew will be more widely known, the mission more continuously documented, and the loss more globally witnessed than any event in spaceflight history. The political response will be proportional to the exposure, not to the engineering merit of continuing. NASA's current Moon to Mars roadmap does not include a section on what happens after the first crew death on Mars. The Artemis documentation describes risk management frameworks, acceptable risk thresholds, and crew safety requirements. It does not describe what happens when those thresholds are exceeded in public, in real time, at 20 light minutes remove, in front of an audience that has been following the crew for years. That event is somewhere in the mission's future. Everything in the history of human spaceflight describes what comes after it, and nothing in the current program architecture changes what that description says.